everyone, welcome to Art Blah Blah. My name's Ursilia Farron and I'm your host. Today I'm talking with Gino, a friend of mine who's a photographer from Brooklyn. He's interested in perception, mysticism, the bigger stuff. He actually uses photography as an act of creation and transformation. We're basically going to hang out, talk about art, photography, the universe, blah blah. Hi Gino.
Hi Ursilia.
Thanks for coming. So Gino, what were you trying to capture when you first started doing photography?
I think what I've always been interested in is the stuff that we can't quite see, but we sense that there's something there. And so all the photographs that I was making, I think I was looking for something and I wasn't quite sure what I was looking for. So when you say what was I interested in capturing, it's funny because I don't think of it that way. I'm not really interested in capturing something, but I do have a strong feeling that I can create something that will somehow give me a little more access to the things that I think are hidden in plain sight, the stuff that's bigger than us. So I'm really interested in using photography to transform the world. I'm interested in using photography as an access point, as a way of creating rather than capturing. How can I change things and work this situation and distill it down and see what's happening in this moment and sort of turn it into something that's bigger than the sum of the parts. Use it as a form of divination almost.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've been shooting and practicing photography for how many years now?
The first really good picture I made was in 1987, and I was messing around for several years before that. Maybe you could say I've been photographing since 1984, so that's 31 years.
Yeah, and you teach photography and you do workshops, so you have a pretty strong overview of the parkour or the passage of time when it comes to photography.
Yeah, I mean, I had my feet deeply and firmly rooted in traditional darkroom work and in commercial photography, and so I've had the pleasure and the privilege of sort of watching the onset of a paradigm shift in photography, and there have been many. I mean, digital is not the first process paradigm shift in photography by any means. There have been more than 100 distinct photographic processes since 1839 when the medium sort of arrived. So yeah, it's been really interesting to be a photographer in these particular 31 years, and I've pretty much not done anything else to make my living, as a grown-up. So I've worked as a photo assistant, as a photo editor, as a commercial photographer, as an artist, as a consultant, as a teacher, as a workshop leader, and it's been really, really amazing to sort of play in these two very different iterations of photography.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as Malcolm Gladwell, sort of lays out, I've definitely put in my 10,000 hours. It's probably more like 40,000 at this point. So pretty comfortable with my identity, or one of my identities, being as a photographer and a photo artist.
Yeah, because I mean, I think about how there's been obviously, everybody there's been, from analog to digital, there's been a shift, and for everyone, everyone has felt that shift. Multiple worlds have felt that shift. The music industry has felt it, the film industry and the photography industry. But how do you feel about how now there's cameras in our phones? Like, how do you feel about the fact that photography is now becoming so accessible to everyone that almost saying that you're a photographer kind of sounds like you're a cook or something? It doesn't have like the same kind of quality, or at least I feel that way. Well, maybe I'm wrong, but like, what do you think?
There's definitely a lot less skin in the game. I mean, when I was in my 20s, and I'm sure this was even more true if we go back historically, there was a big investment involved with becoming a photographer. There was a big investment in terms of the technical learning, and a big investment in terms of money. You really had to spend a lot of money in order to process the film and print the images and learn what you needed to learn. And now, it is easier than it's ever been to make photographs that are properly exposed and expressive and meaningful. So there's been an explosion of the number of good photographs that are made and the number of people who can make good photographs. And the democracy of that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But it also means that as a commodity, photography has been completely diluted. I mean, part of the reason that photography is falling apart as a business is because photographs are a commodity, like pork bellies. And if there's a glut on the market, it means that the price of any particular single photograph becomes less and less and less. So it becomes really hard to make a living as a photographer when there are so many good photographs available for free or for cheap. Now, the question was, how do I feel about this shift now and about how easy it's become to make photographs?
Yeah.
And my informal research has shown me that every single generation of photographers since the beginning of the medium has felt this way. Picture the first set of photographers in the 1830s, 1840s, who had to grind their own lenses. They had to be master chemists to mix their own chemicals. They had to figure out how the whole process worked and work while everything was wet on massive glass plates.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of skin in the game. And there were only, a few dozen people in the world the first few years who were capable of doing all of these things and making decent photographs. Then, say 30 years later, it got a lot easier. Now, my timeline might be slightly off, but let's just give me some slack on that.
Yeah.
So, a few years later, it got a lot easier because the emulsions got faster and people like Edward Muybridge figured out how to take pictures that were instantaneous, where instead of a picture taking 20 seconds, it became a fraction of a second. So that became a lot easier for a lot of people, and people started to produce cameras commercially or chemistry commercially. So you could buy a camera and you could at least buy some of your chemicals rather than having to source them directly yourself.
Right.
And then later the cameras got smaller and faster, and Kodak sort of introduced the idea of photography for the masses late in the 1800s.
Well,
and then you go into the 20th century and you get cameras that are getting smaller and smaller and 35 millimeter and then color. But, the generation that had to focus their cameras manually, which is in my lifetime, really thought that autofocus was absolutely absurd and it was going to ruin photography. People said the same thing about 35 millimeter cameras versus larger pieces of film and bigger cameras. It's ruining photography. Anybody can do it now. So I think every generation has felt like, well, anybody can do it now. It's all ruined. And it still seems like it's pretty alive and well. So
that's crazy pants.
So imagine instead of the camera in your phone in your pocket, or instead of your brand new Fuji X100, you had to drag around a camera that was like, 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, and you put in one piece of film at a time that's actually a huge glass plate. And before you put the film in, you have to coat the glass plate with toxic chemicals in a little tiny dark tent that you're carrying around with you. So, okay, it's hard enough to do that in your studio, but people like Carlton Watkins were doing that after dragging enough stuff to make hundreds of photographs up a cliff face in Yosemite, where like his mules would fall to their death. I mean, that's dedication. That's skin in the game.
Yeah, that's
so
definitely skin in the game.
So the difference now, is it takes a lot less investment to be making beautiful photographs. But I still think the dichotomy isn't about easy and hard. I think the dichotomy is about meaningful photographs and photographs that are meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I've always thought of like I've always considered good photographers people that it wasn't about the tools, it was about the content.
Yeah.
And so as I have this ongoing debate with a friend of mine who is always trying to figure out what what's the best camera? Like, which camera should I get? What's the best camera?
Cameras as jewelry.
Right. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if it's a plastic camera and you're going to shoot something that's interesting. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
It's not about the tool. It's just what's interesting what I find interesting right now is that, like, you take Instagram and basically I look at Instagram like Facebook of photography.
Yep.
Like I'm on Instagram every single day, like a couple of times a day.
And you're making beautiful photographs on Instagram.
Yes, but a lot of people are making beautiful photographs on Instagram. Thank you, by the way. But I just think it's interesting how, like, the plethora of choices, how many people are just creating fascinating content. You know, like, even like if you just look at, you know, National Geographic's Instagram account, it's like I could have like flipped through 100 magazines when we were in the 80s or 90s, not seeing that many amazing images.
This is the upside.
So it's
of
insane.
where we're at now.
Yeah.
Is that there are more good photographs than ever before.
Yeah.
And that we can find them. I mean, it used to be if you wanted to see photographs in the 1970s, you had to go to a gallery or subscribe to magazines. That was the only delivery system. I want to go back a little bit to two things you said, though. One is about, you know, plastic cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to see some great photographs that were made with plastic cameras, or if that's something that you want to have sort of a greater awareness of, my friend Sandra Carrion started basically a worldwide international annual photo contest for plastic cameras called the Crappy Camera Show with a K. And I think it's more than a decade in now, and that's really quite an intense cult. And I had the honor of being the sole juror for the International Crappy Camera Show last year. And if you went looking for the 2014 Crappy Camera Show results, again, with a K, Crappy K Camera, so there was some phenomenal work in that show, and I did an incredible job curating it, if I say so myself. The catalog is really beautiful. So there are all these subworlds inside photography. There's Instagram, there's the crappy camera world. There are all these people now who are intensely devoted to working in antiquarian processes like wet plate collodion, which is what Watkins did. And then there are people who are just taking pictures with their phones. And then there are all these people who are using really intensely expensive cameras that are capturing more information than any camera has ever captured before. And all of these are part of the greater world that we're talking about, which is pretty big.
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Because you can really watch. You don't have to be part of anything. You can just be part. You can be part of it in a very passive way.
Well, this is
interesting.
This is a beautiful question, though. I mean, how do we live in the world? How do we create? How do we have relationships in a way that isn't completely circular, right? That isn't just spinning and going nowhere, but also isn't necessarily pushing or pulling. That's really being present. You know, creating and being present and living a meaningful life. And this is a question I'm like obsessing on now. I mean, how do I make photographs that are meaningful, but how do I live my day in a way that's meaningful, that accepts what is, but also is creating what is at the same time, but not getting caught up in, I wish it wasn't like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think photography for me, like the way that I shoot is like there's an absence of anything except for that moment. So I don't actually, when I'm shooting something, I'm so within that moment. It is complete concentration and focus.
And it shows in the photographs. I mean, that's the subject of your work. The subject of your work is sort of the presence of what is in a beautiful visual way. But a few minutes ago, you talked about, you know, content. You know, people making photographs that have content or not. And content isn't enough, right?
You don't think so?
Well, no, not at all. I mean, it has to have content and structure and meaning and form and technique. And for me, if a photograph or any form of art isn't firing on every single level, then it just becomes conceptual and sort of heartless to me. So content is great, but I mean, that's just taking a picture of an interesting thing. I mean, that's different than making an interesting picture. And for me, the difference between things that are going to make interesting pictures and pictures of simply interesting things is an edge. That's a really interesting edge to explore. I mean, if you're just going to make pictures of interesting things, then anybody who can find an interesting thing can be a photographer.
Right.
Or an artist. And that means sort of everybody. And I'm not trying to be exclusive, but I think there's a difference between using whatever art form you use as an act of transformation and of revelation and of divination, and simply saying, I saw or heard something interesting.
Right. I mean, I think that brings to mind Salgado's work. I think that to me is like quintessentially that. I mean, in the sense that like he takes pictures of like his whole series on the Workers of the World series. It could totally be kind of depressing and sad and intense to look at, but ultimately you actually see almost like something other, and that other seems to be almost like a call to God or something.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if someone had simply gone to any of the places that he went to, like the open pit gold mines in Brazil, and just did a bunch of, sort of snapshots, it wouldn't connect you with all that stuff. It would connect you with something, but it wouldn't be this sort of transcendent sense that there's more to us than meets the eye. There's a beautiful, beautiful quote in Coelho's book, The Alchemist, about how everything in this world is simply a promise that there is another world and that other world is perfect. So, all the stuff we make pictures of, all the stuff that I make pictures of, I think of it as almost like a Neoplatonic placeholder for something else that we can't quite see. It's all just metaphor, but we can make really, really beautiful, really powerful metaphors that go beyond words. Of course, ironically, all we're doing right now is talking about it, so it really abstracts into words. But it's nice. One of the things that I love about photography is the ability to connect with something that is in the place where we don't use words.
That's very accurate.
What if everything that we think is true is simply a creation of language and culture? The way that we experience the world is determined by the words that are available in the language that we grew up in. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's even more. You can deconstruct it to even more than just language. I think it's sound. Like, I'm bilingual,
sure.
So I actually think about the construct of the world based on sounds that are coming out of our throat, that are like formed by the muscles of our mouth.
Yeah, this is what Terence McKenna affectionately referred to as small mouth noises. That we do all our communicating through small mouth noises,
pretty much.
Which apparently is one of the least elegant ways to convey lots of information that can possibly be imagined.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it. Like, that's why it makes me laugh when I listen to other people speaking other languages, especially if they're really...
Oh, you should hear my Norwegian friends imitate what English sounds like.
Yep.
And they make it sound like somebody talking with a mouthful of marbles.
That's actually...
that's how they think of how we sound.
So I think if you take the structure of language away and you just think of sound as like kind of a way for two people to say things at each other, then you see that like our world is constructed by that.
Well, there's a beautiful thing that Tony says about listening for the stuff, listening for the song in between the words.
Yes.
Right? So even when you and I are conversing, and even when people are listening to this, they're constructing meaning out of the words, but there's other stuff that's being conveyed, and it's being conveyed invisibly. And I don't quite know what it is, and that's the stuff I'm really interested in. I'm really interested in the idea that we can make pieces of visual art that somehow convey something that has nothing to do with the literal structural meaning of what the subject of the picture is. You take a picture of an apple. Okay, it's an apple, fine. But you take a Paul Caponegro picture of an apple or an Edward Weston picture of a pepper, and suddenly those things somehow represent the cosmos.
Yes. Oh my God, I wanted to tell you, I just saw this picture yesterday. He was taking iris images of the iris.
Of the iris of the eye.
Yeah, and then like whiting out the outside. They look like photographs. Actually, the first time I saw them, I thought it was actually a huge photograph, about like approximately 6 feet by 6 feet. I don't know, like
these pictures of people's irises.
Yeah. They look like pictures of irises, but they're actually paintings of irises. And
the canvases are huge.
The canvases are like the size of a door. So you see this amazing nebula of color, and it looks
and
like...
it's just the circle of the iris.
Yes, and it's so beautiful. I mean, it just like makes so much sense. Like it looks like the cosmos, and it's like right here inside of us, on us at all times.
Have you seen the quote-unquote photograph that NASA released early in January this year? It's the highest megapixel photo ever created, where NASA took 100 and something high-res images from the Hubble, and then basically composited them together into a single image, and then made this movie where you zoom in from the picture of a full night sky as seen from Earth into a view of a galaxy, into a view inside the galaxy, into a view of 10 bazillion other galaxies that you couldn't possibly see. And it looks all like the iris of somebody's eye.
It's insane.
Well, as above, so below.
Yeah. All right. So on that note, thank you so much for coming to work with me and making me learn a lot of things. It was really nice interviewing you, but we always have great talks.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Ursilia. It's always about the stuff that's bigger than us.
It's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're just trying to capture that. That's pretty cool. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Nature is a language, can't you read? Nature is a language, can't